All right, it is live. We are live. It is Thursday, October 15th, 2015, 11 a.m. Pacific, and this is DB Hangups. Today we're going to be talking about resources and advice for new DBAs. So if you have anything, feel free to tweet it at us if you happen to be watching the stream. If not, we'll see what we can capture and just kind of high-level things that people share. Also hoping to talk about things that are on your monitoring dashboards, and if there's time, and we may do this sooner, is just kind of share war stories, because everyone has them and they're always fun to talk about. So without further ado, let's do a quick run of introductions. I'm Jeffrey Anderson. I am a DBA at Box. Do you want to go next, Ike?
Sure. My name is Ike Walker. I'm a database architect at Flight.
Okay, and Shlomi.
Hi, I'm Shlomi. I'm engineer at Booking.com, and I might not survive this talk because my cat tries to kill me. She's going to jump in any moment and rip my face.
We'll make sure to stop all conversation when it happens so we can watch that very directly. So yeah, I guess, what do you guys want to start with? War stories, things you monitor, or resources for new DBAs?
Yeah, let's keep the war stories for later, so we end up with a party, like with lots of fun, and start with the boring stuff, and then go lighter and lighter.
Okay.
Resources for the new DBAs.
Sounds good to me. Because yeah, so we've definitely touched on, like, over the past few DB Hangouts we've done about things for new people, how to kind of do internal conversion or hiring, and just kind of various resources there. And it's kind of a topic that it's definitely recurring. I feel like every probably 6 to 12 months it comes up that someone wants to talk about a little bit, or something around there is happening. So I guess just from your, all of your perspectives, if you have a new DBA, whether it's at your company or just a new DBA somewhere else that's looking for help, what's the first thing you would send them to, or what kind of advice would you give them?
So is that like a person who is asking explicitly, give me some, give me resources that I should monitor, or is that person like, oh my God, I don't know where I am. I need someone to push me, to give me the little nudge.
Let's start even simpler. Someone who their company has named them the DBA because they know how to run an SQL statement.
Right. Yeah, so I would do a little bit promotional at the day and would tell him to attend one of my trainings, which I used to do. I'm not doing those anymore. But that I used to do them, or someone else might do them. These used to be like 2 or 3 days crash course. People would get a lot from that. Like even like a 1-day training at the Procurement Live tutorial. The DBA ramp up. That's kind of in the right direction. It's just generally covering all sorts of aspects. So that's pretty cool. Yeah, there's two approaches. There's three approaches. One is to send that person into a lot of reading and blogs and books, etc. The other is let that person work in some staging environment and just try and figure out stuff and etc. And the third approach is, this is production. We have to do this. I'm giving you some 2 or 3 easy tasks and figure it out. I mean, there are explicit tasks that I'm asking you to do. So, like, these are 3 different approaches. And I would definitely go with the production approach, as long as we need to provision a new slave and make it replicate from the master. So that's a relatively, complete task. It's not too risky. Chances are this new DBA is not going to break everything. So that's kind of a task I would give a new DBA that would help him get into speed.
Yeah, I would agree that training was helpful. When I switched from using Oracle to MySQL, one of the first things I did was attend a MySQL DBA training. And the training, it's for the content itself is really good, but also it's just a good opportunity to ask a lot of questions you have, both to the instructor and when you've got break time, you can talk to fellow classmates. And I remember just having a lot of really simple stupid questions that I would ask people, and it was, and then that was a good way to sort of get to know the other people in the class. Another thing that I would recommend for somebody just starting off is to read the High Performance MySQL book. Of all the MySQL books, that's one that I think really, gives you a lot of benefit, as soon as you start reading it. And also, I happen to have a lot of extra copies of it lying around, so that's a good one. If I need to tell somebody to read it, I can just hand them a copy and not worry about getting it back. And then, Shlomi, you had talked about some of the things, when you're in a larger infrastructure that you can give to a new DBA, sort of low risk things, and I think that's great. But if you're in a smaller shop where you don't have that kind of stuff, one thing that I would recommend is doing stuff in testing environments. Either you have your QA or your staging environment where they can play around and break things without impacting customers, or even setting things up with MySQL Sandbox. If you want to teach people how replication works, just show them how to set up a replicated sandbox. That can be a really good way for people to get hands-on learning.
And I think, I just want to echo what everyone else said. Like, training was the big one. When I had started, Percona at the time was doing like a 3 to 4 day training session periodically, and so you'd sign up in the class, you'd be in there with like 20 other people, and you'd walk through some history of things, kind of how the internal structures worked, which if you came from another database, that part was familiar. And then more of the operational things. And I remember for me, like, replication in MySQL was definitely the weirdest beast to learn initially, just because it has like a whole separate binary log, whereas other things usually do some sort of write-ahead log shipping or something. But yeah, like the training was absolutely valuable for that. And I think one of the biggest challenges we had with one of our newer DBAs who started was Percona wasn't doing that training anymore as of a year or two ago. They don't, at least not as organized. And Oracle had a virtual classroom one, but it seems like that wasn't as immersive as kind of the actual classroom setting ones where you'd go and sit with a bunch of people. And so, actually, Mark and Morgan, now that both of you are here, I'd love, love to hear your opinion.
What would you love to hear about? Sorry, I went a little bit late.
So, say there's a newbie DBA, such as yourself, new to MySQL at the company, and he doesn't know anything. So, what would you recommend him to do? I mean, would you send him to reading material? Would you let him practice on production? And what kind of challenges or material would you give that person to push him to the next level?
Good question.
Morgan's just perpetually laughing behind his microphone right now.
Yeah, well, one thing I'm curious is what is the current state of MySQL training? Because I know I did it, 8 years ago that I did an official one, and you guys were talking about Percona and the ones that Shlomi did. So, I don't really know what MySQL training is today. So I'm curious to hear what the training options are now.
Oh, I think Morgan's mic might be dead. Yeah, we can't hear you, Morgan. Sorry, go ahead, Mark. I guess Morgan's got to figure it out.
Yeah. Just do hand gestures. We'll figure it out.
You can see him gesturing at the screen there. Come on. And there are training options. There are various training options as well, right? I mean, we still do the like the performance tuning training and those kind of things as well. And we still have a curriculum team that's doing all of the training and the like as well. So there are various training options. They're on the website as far as I know. I just have a look on there. I don't want to be too markety or anything like that, but we do have various decent training options as far as I'm aware. I mean,
what's the split in half between real classroom training versus virtual?
I think there are still real classroom trainings. I mean, we used to have these emails that used to go out, or emails. I think it's emails or the monthly email blast that listed all of the different training places that they were going to take place. I don't know if that still goes on. I can't remember seeing one lately, but maybe Nathan can fix his thing and let us know. But But yeah, I mean, I reviewed the performance tuning training and that kind of stuff that was written by the team as well. They're good training courses. They're well worth going to, especially for new DBAs. The normal DBA training, not even the performance tuning one, which is a good one, but maybe a little bit more advanced for a new DBA. There are still good, developer and DBA focused training just for a normal new DBA as well.
Yeah, the one I did was the DBA training, and I found it really useful. But part of it was I just lucked out in the fact that when I started my first MySQL job, there was a training in Boston, at the right time. And so sometimes getting the time and location to work out doesn't always happen.
Yeah.
I know training's expensive, and so to travel for it, not everybody's going to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think for me, like the most valuable part about it was, like I said, I did this Percona training about 4 years ago now, and I think it was a 4-day segment, and the first, or maybe it was 3 days, but like the first day was kind of developer day, and so there were a lot more people in that one, and then the next day was DBA day, and then there was kind of a deeper like performance and internals after the DBA day, and so the fourth day was kind of like a live exercise type one. And so the class, like the numbers in the class kind of dwindled over the course of that week. Like the first day was the most packed, and then there were fewer people the rest of it. And I found that going for all four was like definitely most valuable, because then you see, from the developer side, good patterns and code to know, and those are like definitely things, those are good concepts for just any DBA to know, to share with engineers that they work with regularly that write client applications. And then the DBA day was definitely around more of the common tasks, moving replication, talking about backups, the history of InnoDB and how all that kind of came to be with MySQL as a storage engine. And then the internals day is like, okay, now we're going to dive into MyISAM and InnoDB. MyISAM, they didn't spend too much time on at the time, obviously, because it was InnoDB was like packaged with MySQL at the time now. But really talking about how B trees work, how the index structures are put together, how they're stored, and kind of the high level things there. And then the last day was definitely one of the best ones, because we were given here's a setup in AWS. You have this web app. Here's your database. It sucks. It takes like 30 seconds to load a basic shopping cart. Fix it. And so we were put into groups to, and given these instances to kind of work through, and so we divided and conquered, because we had maybe like 4 hours to fix everything. And part of it was like fix some of the code so that it was a little more intelligent about its work. Get rid of the use of doing limit offset in a lot of the cases, and on the database side, set up RAID, do this kind of stuff, and kind of put it all together.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Excellent. I'll try without the headphones, which if you get a little bit of feedback, I'm sorry, I can try them again. But I taught both the MySQL courses and the Percona courses when you're talking about training. So, and Shlomi, you've taught the MySQL courses as well. I don't know if you mentioned that at the start. I joined a little bit late as well. But as Mark said, they have been updated, the MySQL side ones. They went through a lot of revision when we switched to InnoDB as a default. There was some choose your own storage engine for each unicorn magical case for a little bit, but they're really, really good. And one of the guys that works on them, Jeremy, I regret not inviting him to come on this call, because he could talk a lot about some of the changes that happened. I was very proud of the Percona stuff when I worked on it, because it was very operational focused, some of it, where it'd make you do exercises. There's a lot of concentration on making the exercise as well. I'm a big believer of that you have to actually do stuff to figure out what questions you have to ask and what you have to look into more so. So I want to recommend both courses. I know that you can still get Percona training, Jeff, if you do an on-site training. That's certainly an option. And on the Oracle side, yes, we do public classes, probably in fewer locations than prior, and the instructor-led virtual classes as well. There's also recorded sessions that you can join in and go back on.
Yeah, and I think that might be part of the challenge. Is there's probably fewer people now to do a classroom setting at a location where you get various people together. It's definitely more, if you have 10 people at your company, we'll come and do a thing there.
Yeah, I have a slightly even more interesting opinion. I just think it's logistically challenging.
For sure.
Otherwise, to go to all these cities and all these countries, if you're a little bit more risk adverse, you would maybe not want to do that in such a way that it worked in the past. But.
Yeah. So okay. So training's definitely a big one. I mean, I think it's kind of unanimous here. Like, if you're very fresh to it, training is probably the thing to do. And yeah, I think like with a lot of our recent stuff, we're definitely thinking it probably wouldn't hurt to have training come on site, and just if you don't, if you only have like maybe 2 people in an ops group or actually in your database group, it probably doesn't hurt to just bring training on site and bring a bunch of your developers into the mix too, and just to get them into the flow and have them see how it all works, because everyone benefits in the end. Like, it's good to have.
Yeah. So moving beyond training, I want to. There were 2 pieces of advice that the trainer gave when I was at the DBA training. One was to go to the MySQL meetup. So if you happen to live somewhere that has a regular MySQL meetup, that was a really good piece of advice. I started going to the Boston MySQL meetup on that recommendation. And the other thing that the trainer told me which was interesting at the time, was that a good way to learn things is to go on and answer questions on the MySQL forums. So that was 2007. At this point, I've sort of moved on to doing it on Stack Overflow. But for me, that's a really good thing, because it sort of exposes me to other people's use cases beyond the narrow things of my day-to-day. And so going on, there's a lot of easy questions on there, but coming up with a right answer and communicating that to the poster, I find is a really good exercise to sort of keep my MySQL skills sharp and broaden my knowledge a little bit beyond some of the limitations of what the day-to-day is of my job. So I'd say that's good advice in general for anybody who knows enough to answer some questions. Is going on there and answering questions can be a good way to learn more.
Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe if I can comment on your comment. Sometimes when you learn things, you don't know what's actually true and what was anecdotally true. So you think that it's this way, but you don't realize all the edge cases and pitfalls of that. And I think that when you tell someone else with advice what they should do, and then you see other people correct you and say how dumb you were, you get really good. So being a good participant and answering on Stack Overflow and stuff like that, and on the forums, I think you'll learn a lot. I certainly did when I was doing training, learn a lot really quick, because you don't want to make mistakes. It's just embarrassing. But it's really good to learn that way.
Yeah, and the other thing I've found is that as I've answered questions, years ago, and see just how long those things live. People will go on and comment and correct things 5 years later. I'll say something about full text indexes and how you have to use my ISAM for it. And then somebody will come in 5 years later and say, no, you're wrong. You can do full text index on InnoDB, because of course we can do that now. So it's amazing to see how long those things live. So you have to be very careful what you say, because as you said, you will get corrected, which is a good communal learning experience.
Yeah, it's hard on some personalities. It's hard on me to be corrected. But if you want to get better, it's really good if you can manage that.
Yeah, but it also, I've found it really, it forces me to be specific, to say, if you're using 5.5, this is the way it is. If you're using 5.6, and then as I make those distinctions, it really clarifies in my mind, reminds me what the differences are between the versions,
Right.
As I have to keep in mind, I'm on 5.6, but I have to think about what the limitations are for people who are using 5.1 or 5.5, and then, I can talk to some people about the future in 5.7 as well.
Right. Which helps you as a DBA, is you've got internal customers too, and you have to be specific with advice.
Yep, absolutely.
So anybody that remembers IRC as well, and know everybody's on Slack and stuff like that.
Remembers IRC as if it's
Anybody
dead.
that remembers the old
my dad would
IRC. There's a channel called #MySQL on Freenode as well. And their things are slightly less long-lived, right? I mean, it's not like something that's out on Stack Overflow or anything like that. But you get a lot of good MySQL questions there, and it's the same kind of experience, right? You can sit there and help other people if you know a little bit, or you can sit there and learn as other people are asking questions. It's not just real newbie questions, although there is a lot of that on there. There are other interesting questions there as well. And in fact, you know, my MySQL career started in that channel as well, right? I went and sat in there and answered a lot of questions, and MySQL hired me from that channel, believe it or not. So, I mean, that channel, I think, is a great resource for people that are starting out. If you've got an IRC client installed and you're not in there and you are into MySQL, go and sit in there.
Even if you don't have an IRC client installed, you just go to freenode.net, and I think they have a web-based one.
Yeah. Oh, Jesus. Yeah.
It's multiplayer.
That sounds like good advice for newbie DBAs, that they don't need to be able to answer questions or ask them. They can just sit in and watch.
Question maybe for Mark. Every time I log into IRC, I get an email from security saying that I have a virus on my machine. A lot of viruses use Freenode to communicate. So it's like, oh shit.
Oh, that's not. No, they don't use Freenode. They use like Downnet and stuff, man. Come on.
Maybe.
No, but I totally echo what Mark said. And the big one is like, you know, like the few times when I would sit in the hash MySQL room on Freenode, I remember there were definitely some times where things were a little, I'm going to say abrasive, but there was also a lot of good knowledge and learning. I think the big one is just to be in there, and you know, there's a bot that can like test certain flows that, you know, people would talk to in there to like prove a point or something around like certain things that you would do. And it's just good to go and just soak it up is the big one. Is even if you're not actively participating, just having that information and context going there is definitely one of the most valuable things. And I think part of the reason that there might be some abrasiveness is because a lot of people come in with an urgent problem, you know, and they need, you know, a quick help to get through it. But the ultimate thing is you start to learn.
That's one of the things, right? And maybe one of my bits of experience or feedback for people that are going to go and sit in there and try it out if they want to go and try it out is ask smart questions, right? I mean, that's what they want at the end of the day. They don't want people to come in and expect to be spoon-fed. They want people to come in and try to learn, right? That's really what they're after. So, I mean, there are people that will go in there and just say, here, answer this question for me, like some, you know, CS person that wants their question answered for them. And it happens a lot, it really does.
Kind of like a mutual respect thing. There actually are some set of questions that are really easily answered on manual pages, and if you haven't done that quick syntax check first, or semantic check to make sure that this isn't well answered, it's not really nice to waste someone's time on that.
It's, yeah. And you know, and that's one of the things is you'll know if you go in and you know, don't feel that if you've asked the common question, because someone will probably just do like, you know, bang some search word and it'll give you the exact man page to answer your question. Probably something like, can I do multiple alters in one alter statement on the same table? Yes. Read the man page. But for, you know, and you guys are totally right, is more involved questions, more, you know, deeper questions about internals or things that are kind of weird or weird breakdowns, and just being able to kind of talk those through and discuss those are definitely things that are interesting. I mean, I remember there was a conversation recently on a Slack room just about knowing when to drop indexes, and I had commented like, yeah, it's, you know, and index dropping is scary because you don't know if it's still used or not, and I was talking about how you could use like PT show index usage or something like that and run slow logs through it, and then someone else had mentioned, well, there's also that index statistics stuff, and you know, it's also in performance schema, and so then a day or two later, a whole conversation dives in about, well, if you look at the source code, you know, those statistics aren't getting updated if there's a key miss. So maybe that index would be used, but if no records are found, then the counter doesn't get incremented. So is it still useful or not? You don't actually know at that point. Mark, I'm sure you have more context on the performance schema side, but you know, simple things like that, learning about, oh, there actually is potentially a bug or a workaround that needs to be accounted for, and just being able to know about that as well. So yeah, definitely. So I think the high level like assessment and agreement on here is that like finding the discussion forums or communities, and if you're not actively active participation is better because you are helping solve problems and learning more. But even just passive participation and soaking up the material and the information is always good.
Yep. Have you talked much about key areas, things to focus on as startup learning areas for a DBA? Or?
Not as much. I think we mostly just said training. and then like small production tasks. But yeah, if you have like, if you guys want to come up with like a prioritized or itemized list of like,
Right.
here's the things you should
I
learn.
upload some slides. So Jaime Crespo, he works at Wikipedia. He has a kind of, I'd say it's about a full day worth of training on how to optimize indexes and such that he's put under a free content license. He formerly was a trainer for MySQL and for Pacona. So I'll have to find that link and plug it, but I think if we talk raw material, that's pretty good.
While Morgan is producing that link for us, and hopefully for a screen share, yeah, Mark, Shlomi, Ike, what would the key things you would say to start out with are, like, or if you were to like order of priority?
I think for me, number one is understanding backups and backups in general, right? I mean, you talk about horror, or I think you've got horror stories on here as well, somewhere along the lines, right? And for every DBA, the one horror story that you're ever going to have is your data's gone, right? I mean, that's the core of your job, is making sure that the data that is there is protected and recoverable and all of that kind of stuff. That's number one, right? And then performant and all of that kind of stuff afterwards, right? If the data's not there, then you don't have a job, essentially. So I think that's probably number one. Always focus on backups. If you're the person that's just handed the job of a DBA, figure out how you're backing up your database. Figure out if it's being backed up properly first, number one. And then understanding those backups and how they work, like hot backups and all of that kind of stuff. So that's what I'd always put as number one, because that's the core of your job, right, at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I was going to say the first two would be backups and replication.
Yeah.
So often a first task that I'll give somebody is, we'll create a new slave using a backup. So that way, they're doing a restore of the backup, and they're hooking up replication. So that way, you touch both of those areas in one task.
Yeah, and I think the key thing with backups, Mark, you kind of mentioned it, which is like, we talk about backups of like, oh, if some horrible event happens, you'll need the backup. And sometimes that's the case, but more often than not, it's someone accidentally deletes a couple records. And it's not like, catastrophic things like dropping tables, those happen, but it's usually small bits of data are accidentally removed and that it's discovered they're missing later.
Right.
Bugs happen in your client applications, and I mean, it's a fun thing when you're really thinking about how often does data go bad or disappear, or some sort of, quote, logical corruption with the way your business logic works with the data.
Hardware fails all the time, right? I mean, this is the thing. It's not even how you interact with your database, because I've never found any piece of hardware that never fails, right? I mean, they all fail at some point in time. It's just a matter of when.
Yeah, but I think the hardware is less frequent, is what Jeff's pointing out. So, Jeff, the example I always give as well is not even application code, but someone changed the wrong phone number of the wrong customer.
Yeah.
The application's functioning, hardware's functioning, user gone bad. And so you have to restore that, potentially, because it could be important, right? So
yeah,
this total availability strategy, and we can go on forever about that.
Yeah.
That out.
And to your point, Mark, like, yeah, hardware does go bad, and I totally agree, but I think once you get to a highly available environment, you usually have more than one read replica, potentially multi-master setup, so that if a machine goes bad, like, you might need a backup to put it back together, but you could also just bootstrap a new read replica using MySQL hot copy or extra backup or something, or even MySQL dump. And so
MySQL hot copy anymore.
Oh, what's it called now?
Well, hot copy was removed from 5.7.
Oh, okay. So hot copy's dead. I've never used it. I just know it was a thing.
Are you still using it, Jeff?
MySQL hot copy?
You can if you want to. Just
no, we have our fancy MySQL clone program that just wraps a bunch of extra backup magic. And MySQL dump.
I was worried for a moment.
Oh, I know. Oh, what was the other one? InnoDB hot backup? Is that the other tool?
Yep.
But exactly those points, and that's the thing is, like Mark said, hardware dies, hardware fails a lot, and when you get bigger, hardware fails a lot. It's that whole situation of like 1% of hardware will fail. So if you have two machines, that's not that much. They're not going to die probably. But if you have 1,000 machines, you're looking at a much higher likelihood of a machine legitimately just being bad and having to put it together. And so yeah, being able to recover the data, and Morgan, you hit it on the head. Like you update the wrong phone number for a customer, and so you need to fix that. But doing that also introduced maybe your application made other decisions and changed other pieces of data that's denormalized, and so it just has this cascading effect. And being able to recognize everything that's changed, and so maybe the people who know the business logic or your developers, they know what needs to be changed. They just need definitively a copy of the data 4 days ago. That's what they need, and so that's something that you would hope that you are able to provide. But I think we're beating a dead horse. I feel like we always end up talking about backups on here.
Definitely.
They're important.
Yeah, I know they are for a new DBA. I mean, just understanding that is step one, I think. And the other thing I'd say, not so much replication, but just data access, right? I mean, understanding join patterns, subquery patterns, how they work, the semantics of those, and how they perform, right? Are key things, especially with MySQL. I mean, but just in general, understanding joins and subqueries and all of that kind of stuff for a new DBA, because you can say, hey, I know a bit of SQL, but until you really understand how all of that stuff semantically works and performs and alike, you are not really performing some of the DBA function to help developers write that code properly to access the data properly.
Right.
So that's probably my second one, I think.
Maybe if I can paraphrase, Mark, it's surprising to a non-DBA the role of the job that they think it is versus what, with some experience, we think it is. So obviously we always go back to backups because that's what our priorities are with experience. But externally, actually, I think a lot of people think that I'm like some SQL master. But I don't really care too much for the language, honestly. It's okay, it's pretty good. But I don't spend my whole day writing SQL. I do know, though, how SQL executes, right? So it's kind of that difference. It's important.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of SQL, but I have no doubt that any DBA really must know their SQL and really must know how to explain a query and to optimize an index.
I'm okay. I'm not terrible at it.
Yeah, no, I know you're okay. You're more than okay. Yeah, I'm just saying. Not only am I loving SQL actually, but it's even if you're like an operational DBA, you have to know your queries. You have to understand, what's hogging in the system, why that query is acting badly. You have to know that.
Right.
So definitely getting to know indexes, etc., is essential.
But if we abstract that for me, advanced SQL is not writing queries that are 10 pages long. It's knowing how queries execute. That's that difference, right?
Yeah. True.
Yeah, a point I wanted to make on queries is I think one thing that's really important when you get started is to get to know the queries your application is running. And so whether that be using PT Query Digest or the slow query log or performance schema, you need some way to jump in and see what are the queries my system's running, how frequently are they running, and if you can get a new DBA to dig into the queries and start looking at them, I think that's a good way for them to learn a lot about how the application interfaces with the database. And also look for opportunities for tuning. So they look through the queries, they run explain on them. You can learn a lot about your system that way. And I think that's a big blind spot if you don't know the queries that are running on your application. If you just look at the database as a set of tables and you're backing it up and don't look at the query patterns, you're missing a big part of the big picture.
So here's a question I want to throw out to everyone then is normalization. Like, how does that fit into the scheme of things that a DBA should know?
I think it
Yeah,
comes next
well,
along those lines, right? I mean, when I was doing all my foundational learning and training and like, it was, and mine was all back in Oracle actually, not so much with MySQL, but I did a lot of the foundational Oracle stuff with CBT and all of that kind of stuff. And having a good foundational knowledge of that, it doesn't matter what database it is when it comes to normalization. Having a good foundational knowledge of that is an important thing, right? Because it leads into how you access the data in a performant way, how you cut down on overall data size, and all of those questions. And also having that understanding of RI and referential integrity in the database and where that should be managed, who's managing that, and all of that kind of stuff as well. So I mean, you've got to have a great foundational knowledge there. I think it's SQL access and normalization, RI, and how all of that interacts.
here's my take on this. A DBA should be familiar once with first normal form, second normal form, third normal form. Beyond that, like BCNF, fifth normal form, are mostly academic.
Yeah, I agree. Once you get to 3NF, then give up for.
And there's no rules about it, right? We all know how to fix a schema and turn it into a third normal form until we need to really optimize stuff and we take it back to first normal form. It happens. It just happens. So as long as once you get the hang of it, I don't really need a DBA to remember the particulars of the differences between each and every normal form. As long as they have, the vague picture in their head that there used to be first, second, third, but as long as they get the hang of it and they know how to optimize, the tagging the name is not too important, in my opinion. But once in their life, they need to understand it.
Yeah, I mean, you need to understand it so you can understand the trade-offs and the times when you need to denormalize, and that it's okay. That it's not it's not an absolute thing where anything denormalized is evil, but there are specific use cases where you need to denormalize, and you need to be okay with that and be able to explain that to developers sometimes too, because I found that developers often don't understand, the reasons why we denormalize when we do.
It took me a long time to understand that myself, though. Like when you do, how you do, why it's working, why it's not.
Oh, I thought you were the one who wrote that part in the MySQL training. Yeah.
Not in the MySQL training, but I did in the Pacuna training. I showed denormalization.
It's nice, by the way. It's nice to know the names so you can communicate with other people who are familiar with the names, or you can tell them, yeah, I'm going to denormalize from third normal form to second normal form. But on the daily basis, you just need to know how things work. Then that's my take on it.
Yeah, I don't know if I have the conversation that way all the time though. I might say because of a nested loop join, this needs to be like pushed higher up or something, and I'm kind of implying denormalization. I don't know. I'm maybe making stuff up now.
Well, I mean, eventually, yeah, and I think I agree with what everyone said. Like, you should know it just so that you know it up to a point. I mean, obviously doing voice cod normal form and maybe fourth, is definitely an academic exercise really to understand good ways to do a lot of the data denormalization. But then you get to the point where you start understanding the performance trade-offs. And eventually it just becomes a gut feeling. Like, you just look at data and know how to organize it. Like, it becomes like it's the same as building a framework and some sort of code potentially. Like, you just need these kind of little components to get it all working. And it just becomes second-hand knowledge or just second nature for sure. I
would expect the DBA though to understand a little bit on what MVCC is and stuff like that. I would expect them to understand the basic structure of B trees and why they behave like they behave. That kind of knowledge is, I think, invaluable to a new DBA, and I would essentially recommend that people would just read, even at the level of popular science, just get to understand what this is all about.
Yeah, and that's actually really interesting. So I don't know if I've read any and maybe it's in the MySQL manual. I'd have to look again, but like I remember a lot of my knowledge around MVCC and how to manage things like undo segments, undo log type things. Like I learned a lot of that with Oracle and the Oracle 2-day DBA manual, I think, or something like that. And I remember like those were very like that was some very definitive documentation and just kind of walkthrough about the structure of a relational database, at least as it was built for the Oracle database system. Offhand, I can't remember if any of the existing MySQL literature has anything good on that. Maybe someone else here knows.
There is some stuff in there with that talks around MVCC. I don't know if it's super detailed like the Oracle stuff, but there is some stuff in the manual.
Yeah, there's a few blog posts I remember. In particular, there's a Jeremy Cole discussion on MVCC and on the undo log. Like there's a few resources. I need to dig them up, but yeah, like B trees, I kind of started learning them in the academy. So I had database internals training, and we had to program a B tree. So that gave the first nudge. But then I guess I read like some manuals and some good blog posts. Like I'm sure Baron Schwartz has a couple good blog posts on B trees and MVCCs as well. So somewhere along the way, I picked that up from blog posts mostly.
Yeah. So other resources for new DBAs, or should we start diving into some more stories and talking about the horrors of managing data?
Just last, I used to tell people, just open Planet MySQL and skim it through, but I don't know, today it's like there's too much of everything, and it's very hard for a newbie to select the right stuff. So I usually tell them, okay, go to the Percona blog, go to, whatever this and that blog. If you want to know more about replication, go to Data Charmer. If you want to know more about this, go to that blog. But yeah, I guess some blogs are, good to read, and eventually you need to keep an eye out on planetmysql.com, but it's a bit over the top today.
Another resource I was going to bring up was at the last Percona Live in Santa Clara, they introduced the MySQL 101 track. So I don't know what the future of that track will be, but one of the developers at my company went to that, and it was cheap, and it was good for beginners, and he thought it was really really a great experience. So if that's something that they keep in future Percona conferences, I think that could be a really good thing for new DBAs as well.
Definitely agree, and I think that's a big one. Is conference circuit is always a good thing to check out too. The tutorial day at Percona and Oracle is at Percona Live and MySQL Central.
Yeah, come up in about 2 weeks' time.
Yeah, I was like, that's in 2 weeks, so I should, hopefully by then I'll have the name down.
But on that note, can I do a quick plug?
Yes, do the plug.
I will anyway. I was just asking for politeness. We have a reception on Tuesday night where it's free. You don't have to attend Open World. If you're in the SF Bay Area, please come along.
Tuesday night, where and what time?
I think it's 7 p.m. at Gillian's at Metreon.
Okay. All right.
There's a link from my blog, which is taco.ca.
Cool. And you will send me that link, and I will put it in notes, and that's how we'll remember it.
Yep. But I mean, it's an awesome party. Everyone's there. You're going to be cool. You're going to be as well.
But yeah, and so definitely conference circuit. I mean, Percona Live Amsterdam was not even a month ago now. Oracle, my Oracle Open World is in 2 weeks, and so there's a big group of folks doing a lot of sessions around MySQL. I know the hands-on labs there were, at least when I went to it 2 years ago, and I did 1 or 2 hands-on labs. They were pretty good. They were very good walkthroughs around how to do things. And just the fact that you're provided a VM on a laptop and you're able to just kind of go and do it. And the Percona Live, I think it was the same thing. The tutorial day was usually pretty good and had some nice cohesion around doing things and putting them together.
Yeah, if I can extrapolate on that point a little bit and say not just the conferences, but the idea of having peers, I think is really valuable for learning and mutual understanding and so forth. And that develops easiest from conferences. So You have other people that have the same position in other companies, because each individual company is only going to have a couple of DBAs, typically speaking. It's great to have that, spread awareness what other people are doing as well.
Yep. Okay. Any other suggestions for newbies, or do you guys want to start sharing some stories? I guess Mark wants to share the first story.
I don't. A lot of my stories actually come from things like support, and I'm not sure I can really talk about a lot of those things.
Just don't tell us the customer name, and
It's a big social media website, but we can.
Freely admit to a mistake I made as a beginner. I got the syntax between drop column and drop index confused. And I meant to drop an index, and I didn't. So I had to recover from that. It's a bit rough.
I hope you learned a good thing about backups that day.
Yeah.
Oh man, I think my favorite, and mine was more of an operational snafu, not so much of an inside of the MySQL problem, but I was working on deploying a pretty large Puppet change that managed all of our MySQL infrastructure, and we weren't as disciplined about our LDAP user management at the time. So I had changed the user ID of all running MySQL processes under running instances. Thankfully, the only things that failed were some temp table operations that were trying to create temp files on disk. But that was a pretty good learning experience, having your MySQL daemon that customers were actively talking to running as a different user than the data directory that it was trying to use. Don't do that.
No.
Oh, come on, guys. There's got to be plenty of stories you can share.
Well, there's that story. Yeah, there's a story I told at kind of live last year. I had this customer. I was doing consulting at the time. I had this customer that I escorted for many, many years, and they were like online gaming thing, and they had servers in Tel Aviv and in New York, and they had an active master setup, like certification. And that's like a big no-no, right? You don't do that. I mean, you really, really need to be very, very careful with that. You're not supposed to do that. And I was like telling them for years, you should stop using active. But they always want to do that, and they hit like every possible bug in the book, every possible problem. They hit it, and they just kept on going with it. And then one day they bought this new hardware, and they wanted to replace one of the masters with the new server, and they wanted to do that while keeping everything alive, so completely hot swapping an active master in an active setup. And so we introduced a 3-ring active master replication. So we introduced a new server, and then we pulled out the server, the active master, which we wanted to replace. Or that's not exactly the way you're supposed to do that, and you should never do that. And I'm not even going to say what the right way to do that is, because you should never use active master replication.
There's no right way to do circular replication.
Right. So we pulled out the old server, and everything seemed to be doing well, and we wrapped it up and we called it a night. And the next morning I get a phone call and saying, hey, we got a problem. And I say, yeah, what's the problem? And before I let you in on the problem, may I just remind you or just explain what happens if you just unplug a server from a 3-master circle. That server just issued a few statements which were beginning to route in a loop, and then we unplugged it. And those statements have the server ID of the original originating server. And typically, a server would consume in a circular replication the statements which were generated by its very own ID. But that server was not in the ring anymore. So server ID number 25 was issuing a statement that was then consumed by server 26, and then by server 26 again. And that went on and on and on for hours. And there were a few statements. This was a gaming company, and apparently one of the offending statements was like a player has just won a game, and he got this +1 jeton, like one small coin, equal to some amount of money because he won a game. And that particular statement circled throughout the night for like hours and hours and hours. And when they called me in the morning, there were 2 people that were like multi-billionaires in their system, and no one could figure out why until it.
Of course.
Well, we just found the offending queries eventually, and we stopped everything. Of course, we had to take stuff offline and everything. We wanted to, we wanted to have everything online and live. Well, we had to pay for it big time. We had to take stuff offline and fix the queries. It was a bit crazy. There were
you guys have a problem where replication lag periodically went to a day old and then back to 0, and they kept going up and down?
There's a good XKCD to that.
In the case, people just got more money. So there were a few hours involved in fixing that.
Ike or Morgan, come on.
I don't have anything as big as Shlomi's, but I can give you some small stories. So actually, Shlomi's story reminded me of something that happened a while ago. So I was working for a website that had a leaderboard, and that was based on a popularity score. And the way we were calculating that score was, when people would download a widget or vote for it, we would increment or decrement a counter. And I think it was an unsigned int that we were using for that. And at some point we decremented, there was a bug in the code or some sort of race condition, so we were decrementing some of the widgets from 0. And so instead of going to -1, it actually ended up at the max value for an unsigned int. So it was like 4 billion. So all the things that got falsely decremented to -1 ended up on the top of the leaderboard. And so people started noticing really weird things in the leaderboard. And I think it was implemented with triggers or something like that. So I had to go in and fix all the triggers to make sure that value never went below 0 to avoid the rollover to the max int size. So that was a bit of a surprise. And other issues we've had. I remember there was a time that I cloned a slave, and the server, it was using the same server ID as before, and replication was just, it kept stopping and starting the slave, and I couldn't figure out why. And that was why, because of the server ID. So I had to go in and fix that. Running out of auto increment capacity, that was when I think it was in our staging environment. Luckily, we caught it that way. But we put in monitoring since then. But that can be, that's something that can creep up on you and really screw you if you hit the max value for auto increment.
Yeah, auto increment max value is definitely one of the worst things. And actually, so that is one that we had happen. We had an auto increment max hit the max value of a int. And so one of the problems was, this is the problem of vertically partitioning your data across multiple databases, is obviously you don't have like some sort of foreign key integrity between different servers and different schemas. So we changed this one identifier to big int in a sharded environment, but we still had a system that was kind of a centralization point that was tracking all of them coming together, and it wasn't updated there. So and the field wasn't named the same because it was a generic field. It was like, so like in other systems it was, I don't know, like file ID maybe, and then this system it was item ID. So that hit a max int one day, and so this whole just one page in our site stopped working because of it, because it wasn't able to, when you hit max int, it keeps inserting the maximum value over and over, which gets really nasty. So we did an emergency table alter at the time, which took like 30 minutes to get done, and to make this one field a big int so it would work. And then we learned there was a second table that had the exact same problem that was getting inserted to secondary after this table with like some other, as part of a transaction. So it continued to be broken, and it was trying to insert values that were too large, so they were getting truncated to the maximum size of an int. So we had to do another emergency alter on this other table at the time. Again, suffice to say, we now have we had a very interesting learning situation that day. We have auto increment capacity monitoring and max field monitoring set up in a report that goes out like I think weekly with an estimated burn down and stuff. And it's one of those things like if you change if you have multi-master situations and you do different auto increment increments and auto increment offsets, changing your auto increment offset from 2 to 4 is a thing you want to really think about, or change it from 2 to 3 or something, just because you're going to chew up that key space a lot faster too.
Yep, absolutely. Another issue that I had at one point, I was using PT table sync to resolve some data differences that PT table checksum had found. But I was using an older version of PT table sync, and it uses a replace. It runs a replace on the master rather than an update. So it deletes the existing row and then inserts it again, which is all fine and dandy unless you've got foreign keys with cascade delete. And so I happened to run that on some tables that had foreign keys, and the way I was running it in the old default configuration, it wasn't turning off foreign key checks. So it was actually, when it did the replace on a parent row, all the child rows went away. So luckily that was on a stage server that I discovered that, and I upgraded Percona Toolkit to the version that has no foreign key checks by default before I did anything in production, but that could have been really bad.
Yeah. It sounds like you find a lot of these problems on your stage environment.
Yes, it's very convenient that it's always on stage.
That is extremely convenient.
Even if I didn't, I'd probably say I did.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, most of these I found I was just scanning through my old blog posts, so it could be that I just say that it's staged in the blog post to make it sound better.
We found this very interesting problem when you go over the size of a maximum integer in our staging environment. Because we insert more data in our staging environment for testing reasons.
Right.
Yeah. Well, our stage environment is a restored backup of prod, so that can happen.
On the subject, though, strict mode is default now, so hopefully these issues will be more transparent.
Strict mode is a very interesting thing. I think we actually still have it disabled globally right now, and we're turning it on at the session level from our client to see what's breaking down, because there are definitely some client interactions that violate good practice, let's say.
Yeah.
Thankfully, they're not.
It'll be a while before everybody gets on strict mode.
Yeah. Thankfully, they're pretty good about things that are bad for replication, like non-replication safe statements. None of those seem to be happening, but there's some other like weird gotchas that happen. My favorite is field truncation, like if you insert something bigger than what the varchar field is set to or something. And it's just a known situation you account for.
I tell you, one of the other ones that's an interesting one by default now is only full group by in 5.7 as well. That one coming along. It's amazing how many people don't do group by properly in MySQL, me included, right? I mean, in the sysschema, when I upgraded it to 5.7, I had a whole bunch of stuff to fix, right, to get it to actually work properly. So I mean, and I know SQL pretty well. I mean, I do. So the amount of people that may hit with upgrades to 5.7 because of that, it's more standards compliant. It's better in 5.7, but it's still only full group by, right? And not a lot of people really follow that. So that's one to watch out for as well.
Right. So, I mean, upgrades will have to change the setting back, and that's fine. But importantly, new generations of applications which get released all the time won't get caught with...
well, they'll be told about it by default, yeah. At least, hopefully it stops.
That's how everyone gets caught, right? It's the defaults. It's kind of like the first hit is free sort of problem.
Mm.
Once you're on this drug, you just keep it.
Yeah, maybe that's a good task for the new DBAs. Have them, turn on only full group by and run a bunch of tests and find out where your code breaks and have them fix it.
Yeah.
not gonna lie, the I am a dummy mode for the MySQL client is one of the best features in the world. We turn that on in most of our environments that are, like most of our dev and staging and eng debugging environments, so that developers don't accidentally run something with, that effectively will do a full table scan all the time. Like be kind of smart about what you're looking for. Try to use some of the indexes. Try to filter the data. Don't join 1,000 tables. Things like that.
Do you really want to delete all those rows?
Yes. Yeah. Like I don't believe you. Don't blindly dump the table and use grep. Please, write some reasonable SQL first. Anyway, so I think we're out of time for the day. So thanks very much for everyone for all of you coming, sharing your stories and all that kind of stuff. And so in 2 weeks is the Oracle Open World Conference, so we will not be doing DB Hangouts. I think we'll actually be starting to move to a monthly cadence after today. So definitely looking forward to catching up with all of you in a month.
Cool.
All right.
Sounds good. Thanks, guys.
Take care.
Thank you.
Later.
Thanks. Bye.